Welcome everyone to today's episode of Fuel for Thought. Today we're going to be talking about how to optimize your pre-fuel, your mid-fuel, and your refuel for peak performance. So we'll try to move forward then. And the first thing we're going to be talking about is just kind of an overview of the presentation today. So I know that everybody on this call has a very challenging fueling schedule. I know some of you personally, we've talked through that. And so we're going to try to make this super practical and navigate how do we integrate pre-fuel, a meal versus a snack, mid-fuel, whether it be in the middle of a training session or maybe between a training session and a lift, or maybe at halftime of a game. And then how do we navigate refuel as a meal refuel or a snack that's going to be followed by a meal. So we'll walk through that. As we walk through that material, I just want to encourage you all to try your best to reject traditional fuel schedules, reject traditional breakfast foods, traditional lunch and dinner foods, because you really need to pursue an individualized high performance routine. And you don't want to box yourself in by saying, well, it's not breakfast time, or this isn't a breakfast food, or things like that. You have to do what you need to do with your really busy schedules and your very unique needs. So let's roll and start talking about the pre-game training and meal. So the purpose of this pre-game meal is to top off your muscle glycogen stores. So we discussed in an episode previously about the science behind fueling and talked about glycogen stores as a place where we store our carbohydrate so that we can access our carbohydrate during exercise and use it to do amazing things on the court and on the field. And so the purpose of this meal is to get enough carbohydrates to top off those glycogen stores so that you have access to that energy during exercise. Also, the purpose of this meal is to give yourself a steady dose of energy. So we are looking to pair our carbohydrates with proteins, with maybe some cooked fruits and vegetables in order to supply our brains and our body with a steady stream of glucose versus kind of a quick shoot of glucose, which we'll talk about is important later. So when we're thinking about having a pre-game or a pre-training meal, we're thinking about that meal being about 3 to 4 hours before. So that will give us adequate time to let the food settle, let the food digest, and start converting some of that fuel to energy. So again, we're going back to the winning plates. This is such a powerful tool in helping you fuel your performance. So for your training, probably focusing on either the moderate plate or the heavy day plate, and building it with lean proteins, whole grains, and vegetables that serve you well. So we are starting to think about easy to digest carbohydrate rich foods though. In general, we like to have whole grains in our day. Whole grains have a ton of great B vitamins. They have great fiber content, but some of that right before exercise is not really necessary, and a big fiber load right before exercise might be detrimental to your performance. So this might be the time to do white rice. This might be the time to do white bread. This might be the time to do white pasta, because for a purpose of fueling your exercise. And then when the exercise is over and you have a little bit more time to digest, maybe you go back to some of those whole grains. For the same reason, limiting raw vegetables or other high fiber foods. So raw vegetables are also going to be really high in fiber, and then beans will be pretty high in fiber as well. So maybe we want to have a smaller portion of those, or just move those to a different time. And the purpose being, again, we don't want to have to divert a bunch of blood and energy to our stomach during exercise to be digesting food. We want to use the blood and the oxygen and nutrients that it is transporting around. We want to use that in order to run faster, jump higher, throw further, etc. So this is not the time for a big salad, although there is a time for that in your day. It's not your pre-training meal, because we just want to try to go a little bit lower on the fiber. And then same thing for that digestibility. we want to try to limit the greasy or creamy or oily or cheesy foods. So maybe instead of a Alfredo sauce, we're going to choose a marinara sauce. And maybe instead of, if we're going to have something like pizza, maybe instead of pepperoni, use chicken and light cheese or something like that. Like I said, definitely a time for some of those fun foods, but right before exercise, you just don't want it to sit on your stomach too long and impact your ability to focus and train on the field. So let's go ahead and kind of talk through some meal ideas. So you can see a bunch of great pictures, whether your pre-training meal is a breakfast meal or a lunch meal. We want to try to check all these boxes. Does it have a lean protein, whether it be chicken or steak or salmon or turkey? Does it have a grain? Maybe that grain is not a whole grain this time. Maybe it's more of a easy to digest grain. So whether it be pasta or a sandwich, bread, maybe it's a potato. Oatmeal sits on most people's stomachs okay. Some people have trouble with the fiber, so you got to kind of feel oatmeal out and see how it is for you. And then does it check that fruit or vegetable box? So I put a couple of examples up there. Stir fry with rice noodles or stir fry with rice would be a great option because you'd be able to do that with a chicken or maybe a shrimp, and then some fajita veggies or peppers. Maybe if you're thinking about a breakfast, maybe this is the time when you want to do a pancake or a French toast with maybe a little bit of yogurt and fruit on the side. I have a picture of a breakfast sandwich on there, which is a great option. You can get your grains from the bread, you can get your protein from the egg, and maybe you can throw on some cooked veggies or maybe even a little bit of avocado would be great on there. And then a simple oatmeal. We discussed overnight oats in a previous episode, so you can go back and look at that if you need some recipes for that. And so these are kind of designed as, like I said, meals that are going to be 3 to 4 hours before your training session. But I know there's a bunch of you on this call that actually train so early in the morning that you don't have time for a pre-game or pre-meal like this. So in that case, we're looking at more of what we call a pre-fuel or a pre-fuel snack. And so this snack will come about 30 to 60 minutes before your training starts. So for people who are training early in the morning, let's think about a pre-fuel instead of a meal. We'll get that meal in at a different time of the day. We'll work it in. The purpose of this pre-fuel snack is, again, to top off our muscle glycogen carbohydrate stores, to support blood glucose, because we know blood glucose is going to fuel not only our high intensity exercise, but also our brain. And we want to make sure that we are focused during our training session, that we are, our reaction time is really high. And so our reaction time is low, we also want to avoid dehydration. So this is a great time to maybe think about a sports drink as a way to get some carbohydrate and some fluid. I put in this slide 16 to 20 ounces of fluid as a rule of thumb in the 30 to 60 minutes before exercise. So you can think about that as maybe half to even approaching a full green Gatorade squeeze bottle that you all have. One thing to think about in terms of sports drink is that the carbohydrate in sports drink actually absorbs really quickly in the small intestine. So sports drink isn't something that's going to sit in your stomach and slosh around unless you drink too much of it in too short of a period of time. So I think everyone has probably done that before, and we've learned what is a little bit too much. But this type of carbohydrate and fluid goes into your system very quickly. So a sports drink could be a really good tool to use in your pre-fuel. We want to avoid hypertonic solutions, and that's just a fancy way of saying we want to avoid juice at this time. We want to avoid protein shakes. A small amount of milk is usually fine for people, but a bunch might be just a little bit too much of a solution to have to go through your stomach and your system in such a short amount of time. So let's look at a chart now that shows us some of the carbohydrate content in some common foods. So remember, we are aiming for 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate in the 30 to 60 minutes before exercise. So you can see some of the things that would check that box. A plain bagel would check that box. You could put peanut butter on that bagel. You could put a few banana slices on that bagel. That would be a great pre-fuel. for the morning. Maybe you are running quickly from class and you want to do a sandwich, okay? A peanut butter and jelly sandwich is not on here, but it's about 45 grams of carbohydrate. And so that would check this box and be great. So you can kind of look through this. You can see sports drink or Gatorade would be 14. And so if you have 16 ounces of Gatorade, that would actually check this box. So for some of you who might have trouble in the early morning eating, you could get what you needed to get at the bare minimum through fluid if you needed to do that. So just something to keep in mind there. You might want to take a picture or a screenshot of this one just so that you can work through some pre-fuel options of your own. Okay, so I have talked to so many of you and heard about some of these pre-practice challenges, and they are real, okay? You are very challenged as a student athlete to optimally pre-fuel, because maybe your training is happening so early in the morning that you're not hungry. Maybe it's too early. Maybe you have a really tight transition from class to practice. Maybe the timing is just very awkward and you're thinking, how am I going to fit this in with all the taping and other things that I need to do, in order to get ready. So the struggle is real in terms of pre-fuel sometimes. And what I would encourage you to do if you've been, experiencing any of these challenges is just really focus on carbohydrate dense snacks and drinks. So how can you get this 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate in the smallest, easiest to digest package possible? So I put a couple of examples of pre-fuel at the top, but maybe that fruit cup, maybe you can get in 2 fruit cups, which would meet the minimum requirement for carbohydrates. Or maybe you can get in a couple of applesauce pouches, or maybe you can do a large banana and that would be okay. Maybe you want to think about some sports chews at this point, or something resembling a fruit snack. That's a good way to get the carbohydrates in. And yes, fruit snacks are not typically viewed as a food, and a health food that a lot of people consume often, but they can really be very purposefully used before and during exercise to get you the fuel that you need to continue to be performing at a really high level. So I put in the box that any fear of sugar at this time, if you feel or your teammates feel like they want to look at the sugar content in these foods and think that this is a bad thing, this is going to impact the ability of these athletes to be awesome, because any fear of sugar in our pre-fuel is going to probably cause us to underconsume carbohydrates before workout, and it's probably going to show up on the field or on the course as an athlete who isn't reaching their maximum potential because of a thought that they had about food that is not well substantiated in athletics. So this is not the time for low carb. This is not the time for sugar-free anything. This is the time to use that sugar and carb for a purpose, which is to fuel your body towards excellence. So keep that in mind in terms of these challenges. And if you have very unique challenges, multiple of these, please reach out to Performance Nutrition so that we can help you with an individualized plan, because your situation might be even more complicated than what I've even described here. So let's go on and talk about what happens if you don't, okay? You or your teammates might think, hey, I've been exercising in a fasted state for years. I've been okay so far. What happens if I just don't eat at all before exercise in the morning? It really does. We have excellent research to show that it really does increase risk for illness and injury. Going into a training session with low blood glucose because you didn't have any carbohydrate or low muscle glycogen stores absolutely is going to contribute to running slower, is going to contribute to not having as fast of a reaction time. And those things are really critical for performance, but also for health, because you don't want to make a fatigue-related mistake that can lead to, a really unfortunate injury. So this pre-fueling with the snack at minimum, the meal if you have time, is just critical. And this is just another shout out to doing your weekly nutrition self-check. Are you having any difficulty concentrating during activity? If so, it's probably because there's not enough carbohydrate in your refuel in your pre-fuel or in your pre-training meal. Are you feeling like the exercise is harder than you feel like it should be, or you're having heavy legs? Heavy legs is a sign that we're running out of carbohydrate during our exercise. So we can either increase the carbohydrate in our pre-fuel, or we can increase the carbohydrate in our mid-fuel, which is what I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And this talk isn't specifically geared toward hydration. We will do one of those, but you will experience some of these symptoms if you have not hydrated appropriately as well. And so one other thing that I would really like to go back to is another challenge is that sometimes people say that eating before exercise makes me feel sick, okay? And that's a real challenge as well. And so again, with the same type of a tip, you know, what can we do that's very, very easily digestible? Going back to the applesauce, that is you think about it, those apples are already kind of mashed up and pre-digested anyway. So maybe an applesauce is something that will sit well on your stomach, or maybe a sports drink would sit okay because it's in a liquid form. If eating before exercise makes you feel ill, it's a sign that we need to do a little bit more experimenting. And the experimenting might not be comfortable, but we do need to find a solution that's going to work for pre-fuel. And it's important to know that the cells in the gut actually turn over and change. So if you're not great at pre-fueling now, we can actually take some steps to train the gut so that you can be better at it as you go throughout your athletic career. So if you need help with training your gut, that's a great reason to reach out to a sports dietitian, because we can definitely help you with that. All right, let's move forward now and talk about mid-fuel. So there has been a lot of research in sports nutrition coming out about mid-fuel recently, and the benefits of eating or drinking some type of carbohydrate during exercise. We actually have research to show that it delays fatigue, that it actually can lead to skill improvements during the second half of a training session when people tend to, start to run out and make some mistakes. Improved agility and coordination when people use mid-fuel as a tool. Improved mood, which speaks to the fact that yes, carbohydrates fuel our brain as well. And reduced rate of perceived exertion, which is awesome. Wouldn't it be great to not feel like the exercise is as hard? We could do that by using mid-fuel. So mid-fuel is even more important when our pre-fuel is small. So if we're just barely hitting that 30 grams of carbohydrate before we start training, mid-fuel is going to be really important for us. There's some graphs on here that show improved force output. There's a graph that shows improved mood, improved sprint times. So I really feel like mid-fuel is kind of, could be your best kept secret. If you're not mid-fueling right now, think about the potential that could be there if you can figure out how to work this into your training. So a lot of people ask, when is it appropriate to mid-fuel, and when can I fuel enough at the beginning to not need to fuel as we go? So let's talk about that. So people are going to need some sort of mid-fuel if they are going really hard for longer than 60 minutes. And they're definitely going to need a mid-fuel if they're going hard for longer than 90 minutes. So for a lot of you on this call, mid-fuel is going to work itself into several of your training sessions a week because you're going pretty hard for longer than 90 minutes with your team. So mid-fuel, the purpose of this again is to keep your blood glucose levels up so you can fuel your brain and you can fuel your muscles, and you can use this high intensity fuel to continue to perform in an amazing way. So you have some options. Your mid-fuel could be carbohydrate and protein. The carbohydrate could be a fuel source for you, and the protein actually could help you start recovering a little bit even before you've ended the exercise. So this might be really appropriate, the carbohydrate plus protein mid-fuel, if you are going between a practice or if you're going between a run and a lift, okay? or a lift and a run. This could be a really, really appropriate time to get a mid-fuel that is carbohydrate and protein. Some great examples of that might be a granola bar that has 10 grams of protein in it, or one of our, protein shakes, but maybe you just drink half of it along with a piece of fruit, okay? A lot of times our athletes find that a bar with about 10 grams of protein in it sits fairly well on their stomach and can be a really good source. So you might take a look at some of those bars that have about 10 grams of protein, but again, with the bars, watch the fiber content. If the fiber is kind of high, if the fiber is over 5 grams, over 6 grams, you might want to choose a different bar, because again, with the digestibility, we don't want to be putting that big fiber load into our bodies when we are exercising. So, maybe you're going to opt for a mid-fuel that is carbohydrate only. Maybe you'll do this for a couple of reasons. Probably the main one would be, you're concerned about digestibility. You're concerned about how this is going to feel sitting on your stomach if you get carbohydrate and protein. So you're going to opt for carbohydrate only, which is still very beneficial, getting that carbohydrate in, because it will provide that fuel to you, so that you can keep going. So I think we all know that if we run out of fuel, if we run out of carbohydrate during exercise or start running low, we don't get to wave our hand and say, hey coach, I'm running low on carbohydrate. I'm going to sit this next part out. We do have to keep going. And from our previous episode where we talked about the science behind fueling, we know that our body is going to switch a little bit and start burning protein and start burning muscle as fuel. And so this is a real detriment if you're trying to hold on to your lean muscle for power and for strength and for health. And so the carbohydrate only option as a mid-fuel can preserve some of that lean muscle mass too. So it's a great way to do that. You can do that with fruit snacks like we discussed. You can do that with an applesauce sauce pouch or two. You can do that with your sports drink again. Our worst option is, especially if you're going 90 minutes hard, our worst option with mid-fuel is to not do it at all, because then we're setting ourselves up to run out of carbohydrate, to start burning our muscle as fuel. And actually doing this day after day after day can impact our immune system, and it can put us at risk for getting sick. So it's very important that if you're going hard 90 minutes or more, that you're figuring out how to get some mid-fuel into your routine. All right, so let's go on and talk a little bit about refuel. So refuel, we have a couple of priorities around refuel. We have our fluid priority, because we're probably going to end exercise in a dehydrated state at least a little bit. So we got to replenish that in order to make sure that our blood volume is high enough and optimized to carry all of these healing nutrients around in our body that we are going to provide with this meal or this snack. We need those carbohydrates again to refuel our glycogen stores. We need the protein to help us heal. Every time we do exercise, we're little micro tears in those muscles, and so we need to put the protein back in order to make sure that we're healing as fast as possible. And then we are going to be looking for a high antioxidant source of fruits or vegetables. We use a lot of tart cherry juice here at Northwestern, so that's an option for a high antioxidant source, but you can easily get this through whole fruits and vegetables that you would add in the meal or in the snack. So the timing on this, some of you all are going to have the opportunity to get a refuel meal in very quickly. Maybe you end your training session and you go right to the cafeteria and you can build yourself a winning plate that is in line with the intensity of your training, and that's amazing. Some of you are going to need to do some sort of showering or treatments or running off to somewhere, and it's going to be more appropriate for you to do a refuel snack right now, and then in a few hours do the meal after that. So both scenarios are fine. I think that you're going to end up with a refuel snack and a refuel meal, no matter what your situation. They just might be flipped. You might do the snack first and then the meal after that, or you might do the meal first and then the snack after that. Our muscles really like to have, especially after exercise, every 2 to 3 hours, some protein so that they can continue to heal over time. We can't heal our muscles up with kind of one shot of protein right after exercise, although that would be amazing. It's an investment over time. So we will be doing a refuel meal and a refuel snack, and you can flip the order if you like. So the meal would look like a plate, and the snack would be something kind of outlined below. Maybe the snack would be a Fairlife and a granola bar with a tart cherry juice, or maybe you would do an apple with jerky and a another type of drink that you like, maybe an orange juice or something like that. So that would be, my recommendations around refuel. And something to consider again is the digestibility. We've got to think about, after we get done with strenuous exercise, our blood is being pushed to our arms, pushed to our legs, because we were just, training and using those muscles as hard as we could. So when our blood gets shunted to our extremities like that, there's not a whole lot of blood and energy being spent on digesting food. And so sometimes people will feel a little sick after exercise, and that's, unfortunately normal sometimes. So we have to think about the digestibility of food again. Maybe this isn't the time for your whole grain power bowl salad. Maybe this is the time to keep it a little bit more simple with simple foods, and then move to something a little harder to digest later on in the evening. So you want to consider digestibility. Some of this is going to be trial and error for you. It's normal to not feel super hungry after exercise, but in that case, this is one of the times when we need to kind of override those hunger and fullness signals and say, even though I'm not hungry, I know physiologically why that is, and I'm going to go ahead and refuel my body anyway. And I'm going to do that milk, and I'm going to do our cherry juice, and we'll wait a couple hours until I feel ready for that next meal. So next week, this is a little bit of a teaser, but next week we are going to be talking about specific foods with healing potential, especially for athletes. So I've gotten a lot of questions about this, a lot of questions about specific foods that athletes should eat for health and performance. And I'm going to be highlighting some specific foods next week. And you would want to work those foods into your refuel. That would be very important. So stay tuned for next week so that we can go through that as well. So what does it look like to put this all together? So Peter, one of our sports dietitians who works primarily with football, put together this kind of meal schedule that works for our football athletes right now. And so putting all of this together with a pre-fuel meal and then a pre-fuel snack, you can see. And then what does it look like? Maybe practices between 10 and 12:30 for them. So what does it look like, to get your recovery in terms of a recovery shake or your cherry juice or both, and then going into a lunch where we do a high intensity plate because it was a high intensity practice. Maybe we take some time to recharge, and in that recharge time, maybe we're doing another snack with amazing healing potential, including colorful fruits and vegetables and lean protein and a great source of carbohydrate, and then we come back for a dinner. So this is kind of how this could get laid out. And I would encourage you all to look at your daily schedules and see how a breakfast and a pre-fuel and a lunch and a refuel, all that kind of stuff works into your day. That would be a really good investment on your time. And then there's a shout out to sleep at the bottom. Really important to get all of these things in, hopefully during normal hours of the day, so that you can take advantage of sleep in order to help maximize your performance as well. We are doing a lot of healing while we're sleeping, which is why a lot of our athletes choose to do a protein-rich snack before bed with maybe an antioxidant-rich fruit and vegetable with that, in order to decrease inflammation while we're sleeping, in order to promote muscle protein development and healing while we're sleeping. And so sleeping is, this stuff really doesn't work without sleep. So it's just a reminder there on the sleep front. All right, so I'm going to leave you all with a challenge today. I would really love for you to assess your pre-fuel, mid-fuel, and refuel opportunities. Is there something that I talked about today that could be optimized for you? Take a look at the material we talked about and pick one area to focus on this week. Don't pick all the areas, just one area. Maybe it's just making sure that you include an antioxidant rich fruit or vegetable in your refuel. Maybe that's what you're thinking about. Or maybe it's trying to up the carbohydrate content in your pre-fuel, or maybe your challenge will be to try mid-fuel for the first time ever. So please think about that. Please take this information and apply it to your lives right away, and reach out to Performance Nutrition if you need any help with that at all.